Before we get started, I'm going to read the required statement that we all have to while we're on Zoom. As chair of the Exeter Police Stakeholders Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. On March 18th, 2021, public notice of this meeting was posted on the town website and on the bulletin board of the town offices at 10 Front Street. As provided in that public notice, the public may access the meeting online and via phone. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting and who that person is. This is required under the right to know law. Okay, I'll start with Elliot Berkowitz.
Elliot Berkowitz, home alone.
Matt Carboni.
Matt Carboni's here. My wife's in the building, but not in the room.
Okay. I don't see Katie Adams. Katie Adams? Oh, that's all right, Katie.
I'm here. I'm alone in the room.
And Harry King? I know you're there. I saw you earlier.
He's here, but he's muted.
He's muted. We will acknowledge that Harry is here. Alexis Simpson, is Alexis here? Oh, she just came in. Okay. Not to put you on the spot, Alexis, I was just calling the roll.
Sorry, I'm here. I'm
Very
in
good.
Exeter. I'm alone.
And Darius Thompson.
I am here in the barn. Sylvia's outside. You may hear her if she decides to bark, but I'm alone.
Excellent. And Tanisha Johnson. I didn't see Tanisha yet. She may join us momentarily. We are right at the stroke of 3. And Molly Cowan.
Hey, everybody, here alone in the house.
And Daryl Brown.
Here alone in the Salt Cave.
Great. So we have a quorum. And also welcome to, Emily.
You didn't call me, but you may have already
sorry, Emily. I'm sorry, because I talked to you, and I apologize.
I'm here and I'm alone in the room.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, my goodness. So we are all here, and the other staff, I call you Staff Chief Poulin, you're here. And also you have some of your staff here as well. And as people speak, if you haven't spoken before, just tell us that you know who you are and if you're alone in the room and if there's anybody else with you as we talk to you. We don't want to put you all through it if we don't have to. Okay, very good. Well, the meeting is called to order. Can we have an approval of the minutes? Were there any edits, changes to the minutes that went out to everyone? I don't see any. Otherwise, I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Motion to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
Motion by Darius, second by Elliot Berkowitz. All those in favor, and I'll call the roll. Elliot Berkowitz.
Aye.
Matt Carboni.
Aye.
Katie Adams.
Aye.
Harry King. Harry, can you hear us? I know he's there. We'll see if we can get back later. Emily Heath.
Aye.
Alexis Simpson.
Aye.
Darius Thompson.
Aye.
And the chair says aye. I don't see Tanisha yet. Okay, so the minutes are approved as written. Next is old business, which I believe the chief was going to chat briefly about the survey. I want to turn that over to Chief Poulin.
If I may, before the chief, if I a point of personal privilege, just all want to say, just take a moment, please, for the officer that was lost yesterday in the line of duty responding to a incident in Colorado. You just take a quick moment. And I'm just really thankful for what you guys do every day. And that's all.
Nope, very good. Take a moment of silence. It's very good. Thank you.
Yep. Proceed.
Very good. Thank you. And so I'll turn it over to the chief for the survey assignments or.
Yes. So we were discussing with Mr. Glowacki on what the best method is on how to go over our results on the survey. One of the things that they've been doing is a survey findings report. So what they do is they get just a few of the people from the committee and they parse it all out and they make a findings report. And at the end of that, there'll be a conclusion as to, what could we have done better? What things went well? What things didn't work out so well with the different questions and the way those questions were posed. And then that findings report gets submitted to the rest of the committee, and then that obviously becomes public. So with that, we were thinking to keep it really small, and it would be myself, the chair, and then another committee person. So I would be looking for the group to vote on that third committee person to partake in that. And I understand you might want to think about that a little bit, or you might want to do the vote today. But otherwise, we can get really out into the weeds with all that information, and everyone's going to have a bite at it, but this way it's just more compact and will be easier to manage.
Thoughts from the committee? Chair recognizes Matt Carboni.
I would nominate Darius to be the third person. I mean, he stepped up for a leadership role in the committee, and, between him and Ann and the chief, should get a first initial glimpse at what the survey brought. And everybody's going to be able to look at all the data, but the three of you guys I would recommend would be the best three to begin with.
Any other discussion on this? No, we can have a discussion. Anybody else that had a burning desire to? If you want to make that an actual motion, then Matt, we can make it a motion. And
I make a motion that Darius be the third person to sit on that small subgroup, and looking for someone to second it.
Second.
I'll second if he wants to.
We'll have discussion. How about that? Very good. Moved by Matt, seconded by Katie Adams. Discussion. Mr. Thompson, would you enjoy doing this?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I would enjoy doing this, but I just had some questions I wanted to ask everybody directly. Emily, do you have any interest in wanting to look at this initially? Do you have any thoughts or concerns?
I'll look at it when the rest of folks get it, especially right now, given that Easter is coming up. You may want someone with a little more schedule flexibility.
Okay.
But thank you.
And I'll go to Katie.
I'm happy to look at it with the rest of the group.
Okay. And then Elliot.
I'm going to be kind of out of the game for a couple of weeks with a surgery, so leave me on the side.
Okay. You have my positive energy and thoughts, and that everything goes well.
I need it all. I'll take it. Thank you.
Okay. Alexis.
Thank you for asking. I feel like the timing is really not great for me either, with Easter coming up and with the multi-day, preparing for the multi-day full house schedule right after Easter. I'm going to be pretty solidly packed.
Understood. Harry.
Poor Harry. We gotta get.
I know you're muted, but if you want to turn your camera on or unmute, or let us know directly if there's any concerns that you have.
Is Bob, are you out there, Bob Glacki? I know you are.
I think his laptop is shut.
Oh.
We're looking at a close-up of his keyboard is my guess.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if there's some technical thing we can...
If you can hear me, feel free to email me or give me a call and I can help you out.
Okay.
Okay. I just want to...
And I know that Tanisha's not here, but if you're not here, then it's kind of hard to, but we'd like to have everyone's input. But I have no reservations about doing this. Just want to make sure everyone else is good with it. We all are going to see all the raw data, but giving us an opportunity to summarize and report back what went well, what didn't go so well, what the responses are, summarize the information. But we all should be able to look at the raw data as well. So.
Right. No, I think. Good.
No, it's it.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Okay, so that was a motion in there, right?
Yes.
Yes. So it was moved, it was seconded in discussion. I'll call it. All those in favor. Elliot Berkowitz,
Aye.
Matt Carboni,
Aye.
Katie Adams,
Aye.
Emily Heath,
Aye.
Alexis Simpson,
Aye.
Darius Thompson.
I could abstain, but
Yeah, right. Cool. And Harry, if you're out there. Did I get everyone just then? Did I miss you, Katie? Did I miss you on that? I think I got everybody.
Did you get Emily?
yes.
Yeah. I thought I didn't get you, Katie, but I did actually. Okay. Very good.
And the chair votes?
And the chair votes aye.
Okay. And I abstain. Okay.
Okay, very good. So the next, go ahead. You can tell me the next order of business.
The next item was the discussion action items goal number 3, develop personnel with the field training officer, Tad, is it Sarad? Did I say that correctly? Is it Tad or Theodore?
Tad's good. It's C-Rad.
C-Rad. Okay, we'll make sure I get it right. And the synopsis of field training a new officer. And then after that, we have Officer Ben Cloutier or Coffee? How do you pronounce your last name?
Cloutier.
Cloutier. Discuss the transition from civilian to officer. And then the last item we have in this section would be Dispatcher Ashley Gioa. I messed that up. Sorry. How do I pronounce your last name, Ashley?
Joya.
Okay. Discussions ongoing through this dispatcher training. I apologize. It's very important to get everyone's name correct. So, but thank you. And then after that, we have a correspondence and an adjournment. So those are the items.
Very good. So with goal 3, Chief, would you like to introduce your officers, or how do you want to start that way?
Sure. So Officer C-Rad's got about 4 years on with us, and he's one of our field training officers, and that's what he's going to speak about today. Is he's going to go into really the basics of field training and what he sees as a teacher, and we see the newer officers as students, so they take that teacher-student role, and he'll give you an overview of how long that is, the different phases of that, and what he's been seeing lately.
So, my name is Tad. Hi. Generally, I'm here to speak about the FTO program. This is my first year doing it, so I am kind of wrapped up in it. It's quite a process. So generally, our program is broken down into 12 weeks, followed by kind of a 2-week observation period. It can be 14 weeks total. It can be longer, and the trainee doesn't gain solo status until all the FTOs, the FTO sergeant, and all our supervisors and command staff agree that the trainee is ready to go on their own. So ideally, we have 3 phases, kind of with a shadow week or 2. 3 phases. Each phase is accompanied with a new FTO. That way you get different approaches, different vibes. Some people get along with other people well. Some people aren't great at portraying a certain message. So that way we get a different FTO each phase. Maybe someone can get through better. Those of you that are work teachers know more than I do. But to kind of break down the phases, phase 1, a lot of people call it the crawl phase. This is when the new trainee is mainly observing the FTO. They're sitting in the passenger seat when the FTO, and FTO stands for Field Training Officer, I apologize. The FTO is driving, he's taking the calls. They are pretty much kind of doing everything while the FTO trainee is simply observing. The trainees are also tested on aspects they learned at the academy. Things like laws of arrest, appropriate search and seizures, criminal and motor vehicle code. This is all tested just to kind of get their baseline. They obviously have to know a certain amount to pass the academy, but then we want to just double check that they know everything so that we can kind of check the boxes and make sure that they are fully prepared to be on the road. These tests they are written, and we do have copies of those, but they also can be verbal as they go on. So the next phase is kind of like that walk phase where the trainee takes the lead officer role on basic calls. This is when they start to really learn how to take calls like simple accident reports, theft or scam reports. And in this time, if there's a stressful call, we'll say a more complex call like domestic violence or a missing persons. This is where they kind of step back, kind of watch and play a supporting role. This phase is generally the longest because this is really where you truly begin to learn how to be a cop. It's applying what they learn in the academy and putting it into a real world situation. There's no more books that you can kind of pull off of. You can only go off of your own intuition and what you can build from your experience and what other officers can give you knowledge. Phase 3 is kind of that run phase. So the trainee has been exposed to different aspects of the department. We have things like detectives. We have our own prosecutor. He goes to court all the time. He handles all of our cases. So you get to just spend a day with him. We get to spend a day learning how to process a crime scene. We have motorcycle units. So kind of stuff like that you don't necessarily do every day, but it kind of gives a little bit of exposure to it. And so over the course of this phase, the trainee should transition from performing as an assisting role on those complex, high stress calls to performing as the lead officer. That way you can kind of see how you progress. And then finally, there's a shadow week where the trainee gets their own car, they respond to calls themselves, and the FTO is essentially there to monitor and only interject if they need to. Other than that, the main purpose is to really see how they make decisions, how they interact with people of the community and of the department itself on their own. So going throughout the training, we kind of have things that we repeat every day. It's not just phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. It's all the phases. The basic kind of stuff is the town geography. Obviously, if you get sent to a call, you got to know where that location is. So stuff like that, the knowledge of town ordinances, the local laws, the state laws. We also go over how case law applies. Officer safety is gone over a lot. We also go over daily our policy, our procedures within the department. Stuff like that doesn't necessarily get taught at the academy because they have to teach everyone from a state level, sheriff's level, and local level. So obviously not obviously, but every government branch, we don't all have the same policies. So the academy can't teach that. So that's why we have to really make sure they understand how we do certain things, and more just the safety aspects. Those are the basic things. Throughout the more complex things, we talk about how every decision must be ethical, legal, and moral. This is where it gets hard because you have to actually think. You can't just say, well, I can't drive over 65 miles an hour. That's easy. That's a speed limit. You have to be able to make these decisions. And a big part of what we're doing now is we're empowering newer officers to kind of interject themselves with other officers, especially if they see something that isn't any of those three. So if brand new first day, I'm going to call you out, Chief. If a new trainee sees Chief doing something that's not ethical, not legal, and not moral, we empower them to step in. It's incredibly intimidating to think about having to do that, but that's kind of what we talk about. And I think Chief would back me up and say that's the right choice. And usually this is kind of done as just an open conversation. I kind of take it as I'm an FTO. I'm not the new trainee's boss. I hope to one day be your coworker, and essentially I want to be someone that you can trust, and vice versa. So that's kind of my goal, especially in those kind of more complex conversations. The next thing we talk about, and this was kind of a hard thing for me, every encounter doesn't have to end in an arrest or a summons or a fine. I thought when I became a cop, I was a problem solver. I thought that was all that I was supposed to do. But now I've kind of just learned and just tried to impart this knowledge that it can be a conversation. It can be, let's find a compromise, or it can be one of the hard things is walk away. If you don't have to do anything, you can simply walk away. Keeping in mind, it has to be ethical, legal, and moral. This gets wrapped up in de-escalation and trying to figure out the best way to deal with a stressful situation. So that kind of more complex stuff is what we talk about every day. So I know it's kind of down and dirty. Probably some of you are wondering, so we have, how do you keep record, right? We follow what is called the San Jose, California model. It is widely used for the country, not just in California. It is comprised of a daily observation report. So I, as an FTO, have to write down everything that I observe the trainee do. This is done by hopefully being as objective as possible, not subjective, because it shouldn't be about what we think, but about what is actually true. So we use what are called standardized evaluation guidelines. It's an SEG. These are broken down into very simplistic ways of thinking of how the trainee did. So we train them on a scale of 1 to 7. 4 is kind of like the basic, the average officer, what you expect. Categories, those can range from driving during stress or non-stress, safety towards yourself and others, how you write reports, how you decide what your action is going to be, whether you know policy and law well, whether you know the town well, how are your attitudes and interactions towards other people in the department or on the street? How do you control conflict? Stuff like that. I mean, that's just a small list, but we grade on all of those every day. And there's always a brief synopsis at the end of everything you saw. You track the improvements, you track the repeated deficiencies, you track what was trained, you track what was reviewed, and it's broken down into 3 areas. So it's the most acceptable area of performance, and it is, well, the most acceptable, the areas that can be improved upon, and then just other documentation that is just good to know. So we write a little blurb about what we did, what was taught, what was learned, and that's how we track those improvements. That's how we track those repeated deficiencies. That way everything is tracked. And so, like I said, you have your 13, 14 weeks, or as long as somebody needs to get the information down. After that, post FTO, training doesn't stop. We do a lot of in-house stuff. We also go to other departments. We go to statewide trainings. There's trainings that the whole department does every year together. There's trainings that you have to do within your first year, within your third year, and within your 5 years. So there's a lot of training that goes into it. 12 to 14 weeks plus is an intense period of time, but it's good. I know that was kind of down dirty quick, but that's kind of a general overview of what our FTO program is.
Any questions, comments? I know I have some questions, but from the committee, Katie.
Yeah, thank you. That was really interesting. I was wondering, what is there a most common misconception you see with the beginning of training? Something that you find, a lot of people come in expecting this, but it's really this other way?
I think probably the idea that a lot of times we can't always help, which is frustrating to a lot of people because they want to help. And it's not that we can't because we don't want to, but sometimes we can't because we legally aren't allowed to help. So I would say that's probably the biggest misconception.
Does anyone else have any? Matt?
Ted, can you just give an example of things that you see that you want to help on that legally you're prohibited from helping on?
Yeah. Mental health calls. We go to an extreme amount of those. Give an example, recently we went to a elderly female, She definitely was suffering with some Alzheimer's, but she was still her own. I can't think of the word, but you make your own decisions for your own health. And she was able to deny every option that we gave her. She wasn't endangering herself, but she needed help. In that situation, we can't make her go to the hospital because she's not a danger to herself or others. There's not paperwork saying that we can make her. And so even though you or I as a layperson would be like, this person needs help, but I can't make her go to the hospital. That's mostly what it is.
Any others for homeowners or business owners in town? Similar circumstance?
Yeah, a lot of them, they come in, they have complaints, and it turns into a civil issue. I have a lot of discussion about there's two separate courts. There's a civil court and there's a criminal court. And technically, we can only get involved in criminal court. Most of the time, it's, let's say, property line disputes. My neighbor keeps on encroaching in my lawn. I'm sorry, did you put up a fence? No, I can't afford it. I'm sorry. But we can go the route of trespassing. Well, no, it's too much. I don't want to do that. I just don't want to come on, so there's different ways that we can try to do that, but it's not necessarily the conclusion they want. Civil versus criminal, we can really only do criminal.
Molly, you have a question as well?
I do. Thank you for describing that. It was really interesting again. And this is something that I've heard from our chief before, but you mentioned it and I want to pick up on it a little bit. You said that going into policing, you thought that every interaction would end up in something happening, like an arrest or, something happening. And I'm wondering, I don't know how long you've been with our force, but has that expectation changed? Does it change police precinct to, police force to police force? What are some of the challenges that some of our officers who are coming in from other places feel? Like, what is the qualifier here? Because I think that that's not something that I necessarily think is a problem here in Exeter that I know of, but that certainly seems to be something that has happened in other parts of the country. And so how are we training against that, or how are we best making sure that our officers are using common sense and not, endangering people just because they are making sure to act, and that's what they think the expectation is?
A lot of times it's somebody will take a hold of me, or I'll just put my hand on one of my coworkers' shoulders and say, hey, you as a person, what do you expect to come out of this? It's, we kind of have to take a step back and just think, is us acting actually going to better a situation, or is it going to make it worse? So I'm trying to remember specifically what you asked.
There was a lot there.
Well, I just, there's so much of this that is discretion, which I think, I think is a really interesting part of policing and keeping a state, keeping a community and a police force safe.
Yeah. So legally, the only time that we have to do something, legally, the only time that we have to follow the law is not follow the law. Sorry, we are told what to do is make an arrest when somebody violates a protection order. Other than that, you're absolutely right. It is fully discretional. I think we need to look at what is the bigger picture here. Let's take a trespassing thing. If somebody is technically trespassing because they're sleeping out in a vacant parking lot out in the back corner where nobody else is around them, are they really trespassing and causing a scene? As what you think you have to do something. Well, this person's trespassing, we have to kick them out. Right? That's kind of what I thought getting into this that we had to do, but no, they're not causing a scene. Technically, are they trespassing? Sure, maybe they are. but they're not causing a scene. They're not hurting people. They're not even doing anything with traffic, you know? So it's that kind of conversations of, what did I say? Ethical, legal, and moral. Is this decision I'm making ethical? Is it legal? And is it moral? And it's a lot of conversation about that.
I think we've also moved to more towards community policing, as in what works best for the whole community, like that whole philosophy shift in the last 2 years as to what works best for our community. And like we have the community resource officer now, and that's kind of how we take a lot of calls that are in that gray area. Like, how can we help within that confine?
I can talk a little bit about the philosophy and how that's changed, and how the FTOs are pushing that onto our new officers. And I'll use an example I've used with many of you, and that's the suspicious person call. Okay, so what we're seeing across the country, and what we see here as well, is something called racism by proxy. Okay, and what that is somebody's calling in a suspicious person to dispatch. The dispatch then dispatches an officer to that suspicious person call. That's the only information they have. And I'll give you an example, a real life example of something in Exeter. Is a suspicious person parked at the rec pool. And this was years ago, but the officer gets dispatched to the suspicious person with the description of the vehicle. They get there, there's a gentleman sitting in his car, and it's an African-American male. Okay, so now the officer thinks they have to go up to that car, make contact with this person because they were dispatched there, so they have to do something. Mind you, it's the daytime. So now they're making contact with this gentleman. They're asking for his driver's license. They're letting him know that they're there because of a suspicious person call. Okay, so in that gentleman's mind, what do you think is going on? They're there because of the color of his skin, right? I mean, let's be honest with everybody. We need to have these discussions today more than ever. So that officer's in that awful position of having to do that. They think they have to do that. My officers now know that is not what's going to happen now. So that ends with, okay, there's nothing suspicious about this gentleman. He was just parked there. They go on their way. But that interaction, that gentleman's not left with a good interaction with the police. The police don't feel good about what just happened. But the person that called this in is nowhere to be found, right? It's an anonymous complaint into dispatch. And that was that. So now our dispatchers, if you call in a suspicious person to us, we're going to ask more questions. And it's going to be revolving around the behavior. What is suspicious about that person? What are they doing that's suspicious? And if they can't give a solid explanation on what is suspicious, we're not going. Maybe the officer will drive by and take a quick peek and say, yeah, it's all set. But we're definitely not going to go and make contact with someone that's walking near PEA, that's suspicious near PEA. And that's all it is. They're walking near PEA. And that's just an example. But there's many like that. You know, somebody in the neighborhood that's suspicious. Well, give a little bit more. Are they going into yards? Are they peering in things? You know, the behavior is what we're concerned about. And that's what needs to happen more often in other places around the country. And you'll see some positive change with that. It's not because we've always done it. I said this before, just because we've always done it doesn't mean we need to continue to do it. So that goes to, it can go to really any kind of call. Dig more into it before, somebody's hanging out on the side of the road at a street corner and they're just hanging out there. There's nothing illegal about that. But somebody in this town will call that in because they're hanging out on a street sign. So I'll call it in. So back in the day, we would have to go and identify the person and get into this whole spiel. What are you doing? Where are you coming from? Where are you going? It's an interrogation, isn't it? So that's where he's going with as far as teaching the newer officers. You can't teach common sense, but we look for it when we interview applicants. We look for it throughout the entire process of the background. That goes a long way. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. That comes in line with tickets. That can come in line with certain arrests. You know, if we stop a woman and she has a baby in the back of the car and we stop her for, minor speeding, and then it turns out there may be a bench warrant for that woman, the officers can use the discretion, ma'am, you need to go to court, you need to clear up this bench warrant. Because we're not going to tow the vehicle, we're not going to take the child and put the child in a police car with their mother. It's just not going to happen. So it's common sense policing, legally, morally, and ethically correct choices, but we can make those discretionary calls, and they should be doing that. And that's the philosophy.
So, Chief, do you have, in that example from dispatch, do you actually have, I'll use the word script, but actual questions so dispatch can ask like the top 5 questions of when they get a suspicious call, or so it's consistently the same, and then as they get those answers, then they're going to know how to get the call directed properly?
So that's part of our training in dispatch is teaching them to ask those questions based on what the caller's calling in. So like suspicious people, what exactly are they doing? That's all part of our training program. So yeah, we do teach them that. There's not necessarily a set of questions, but again, they use their judgment and ask what needs to be asked in order for us to, run it by the officers to see if we need to go by or respond to that area.
Katie, you have your hand up as well. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, this seems like exactly the kind of thing that is going to be hard to trust your gut on in the beginning, and then kind of over the years you would get more experienced at it. Is there a formal process, or is it more informal how these incidents might get reviewed? Like if a young, new police officer finds out about this suspicious person call and maybe they do make contact, is that, I'm not talking about them getting in trouble or anything, but is that like, how would they benefit from your wisdom collectively about like, well, here's another way to do it, just kind of on the job as they're starting out?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they're constantly, even when they get off field training, they're still probationary employee for a year. So they continue to get monthly evaluation reports. But not only that, but every day on their shift, there's a supervisor on that shift, and they're monitoring what goes on. If they happen to hear, perhaps it's a newer dispatcher, dispatch an officer to a call like that, the sergeant will override that and ask, okay, what are the behaviors? Is there more to this? Do you have a phone number I can call the complainant back and get more information before sending the officer there? So we do have checks and balances in place for that.
As an FTO on a training a new person, if they decide to do a pedestrian check or a motor vehicle check, I'll ask them. And if they can't give me a good description of why it was suspicious, why they thought it was suspicious, and anything about it, if they just said, well, time of night they shouldn't park here. It's an open parking lot. So they have to be able to give me something concrete, whether it's a violation of our town ordinances, state law. They have to give me something concrete as to why they did that. And if not, then we train. All right, let's not do that.
Darius, you also had your hand up. Would you like to?
Yes, so a couple things. One, Chief, thank you for reaffirming the behavioral-based interactions. That as well as the behavioral-based, you're watching the behaviors not only of the suspects or calls, but you're also watching the behaviors of the officers, because it's not what we say and what we mean, it's also what we do, right? It's how do we act in those situations? What are the behaviors that led to those decision making? And so that's a great to learn about. What I did have a question is you gave an example when you where there was a woman that was in mental distress, but she was able to, or they were able to turn down all the offers for help, right? And to make their own decisions. What if the situation is someone's in a psychotic state? Are we trained, or are you trained, or with the new techniques, and able to de-escalate, whereas the normal procedure would be to escalate, and the person becomes more psychotic because they feel that whatever they're going through, what they're seeing is causing them to become more animated. Is there a way to de-escalate that versus having someone that's really having a psychotic episode? Next thing you know, they're in for lack of a better word, they're in handcuffs, ankle cuffs, taken out with very little clothes, and then thrown into the hospital when really they need to be assessed and to be calmed down and the whole thing. So do we have those techniques, those skills, and part of the FTO, or as an ongoing basis to help address those types of situations?
We have no time limit on calls. So as long as we're in a safe area, we can spend as long as we need to either convince, maybe find a phone number for a trusted friend or relative to get them the help they need. Maybe they just are the person you talk to. As long as they're not becoming, let's say, running into traffic, that's when we need to make the move, the decision. Okay, for your safety, we need to get you into the ambulance, at least into the ambulance kind of thing. But kind of where we're at is if we can make sure that they're with somebody who is going to say, yes, I'm going to be with this person for the rest of the night. I'm going to make sure they're safe. That's kind of where we're at, unfortunately, is just giving them as much time as we can and trying to, even if it's just the neighbor is going to sit with them for a couple hours. That can also be an option. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I'll just relate this. I was an RA at a state college in the state of New Hampshire, and as part of being a paraprofessional, there was a resident that wanted to. I was the person on duty that night, and not that I would advocate doing this, but it did make a difference in this person's life. So it's a good end to the story. They were on the third floor on a residence hall, and they had managed to get out on the ledge. And it's at night. Now, fortunately, the ground wasn't flat, so it went uphill. So you're up here, so it wasn't that far to fall. But the point being, this person was in distress, and they wanted to jump off the third floor. Probably would have fell maybe 6 feet. But I made the decision to get out on the ledge with them and sit and just talk and just listen. And it took a while. I said, we're not going to fix this tonight. We're not going to, but I took the time to let them know, if you want to jump, you can jump. I'm not going to stop you, but I'm going to talk and listen to you. And 6 years later, I ran into this person again, and they thanked me for that. I never gave it much thought, but the point being is it made an impact on his life that somebody cared. He's married, has kids, and is doing fine. But the point being is that y'all care about what you're doing, and hearing that you're willing to take as long as it takes, as long as you're not running into the street, that's comforting for me to know. That's something I didn't know, that our officers in this town, I'm sure there's a lot of other officers that will do the same thing. That is why I was emotional when I said take a moment of silence earlier. I just think that a lot of times that we don't really appreciate or say thank you enough and really truly mean it. But this experience has opened my eyes up to a lot of the training that's ongoing. It's not just go to the academy, take this course, next thing you got a badge and a gun, there you are. No, that is not the case. There's a lot more that goes into it, and there's a lot more that as you evolve over time, that you become the community officer, you become the police. So it's just rewarding and refreshing to hear this approach. And I just wanted to say thank you. And it's just, it's comforting.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, what you described as sitting on the ledge, that's in my mind, that's the goal, right? That's, you build a relationship and you talk this person off the ledge in your case, literally.
Well, and that starts right when we take the call as well. Like a lot of the questioning we do as dispatch is to ask, about our approach. Are they, adverse to law enforcement, or, are they friendly with law enforcement? We ask all those questions. That way, when our units are arriving, they're present and aware of what might work better. And that's part of our mental health training and all of that.
Excellent. That's good. And I know there's a comment that was made relative to like the new logo doesn't really do a whole lot, but again, is what you see and what happens, how everyone behaves, it makes an impression. So having a logo, I think, is a great start, but also it's how the officers are behaving, how we are interacting with y'all, so it's those things that build. And that's a step in the right direction. That's my opinion. So. Just wanted to put that out there. I know we're off track. We're off track. I'm sorry.
Not off track, but I muted myself by mistake. So just as part of the meeting, Emily is next, and then followed by Daryl, and then you, Matt. Okay. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just as a chaplain for the department, I get called out a lot. When there's a particularly hard thing happening. And what I've found with these officers is they really do try to de-escalate as much as possible. They're not butting heads with people. It's not a contest of any kind. They're trying to help folks to calm down and to get into better space. So I've never seen any kind of, but I think the reality though is that, we have to pay to make sure that they get the training that every officer should have, because there are some officers, not on our department, but on other departments, that would go into a situation and make it worse. And I know just in the time I've been a chaplain, like the 20 years since I started doing any chaplaincy work, I've learned a lot more, in terms of techniques, in terms of ways to work in traumatic situations that will have a better outcome in the long run. So making sure we fund the officers to go and have that mental health training that they need, and the dispatchers too, it is really important. But, having been on the scene with some pretty bad calls, I have been impressed by how they try to bring the stress and the trauma of the situation down and get everyone working on the same page.
Daryl? Thank you, Emily.
Thanks. It's a question for the chief and or FTO. Is there a formal or informal loop between the shift supervisor and the FTO, so that when something happens and an officer might need some feedback, the shift supervisor helps with that, and then does that then loop back into your training process?
So we have, if we need remedial training, that'll encompass if I witness or if I observe something that needs to be fixed. It can, if it's a conversation that has to happen, that's it. Perfect. If it's something that we bring, yes, essentially yes. Remedial training. It can be with just me. It can be with other FTOs. It can be with the supervisor. It can be scenario training that we've brought in other people from other departments, locals that we trust to run a scenario, and so we can actually press stop. All right, let's review. Keep going with the scenario. So that's part of the FTO process I didn't actually talk about, was the remedial training, how it's documented, how it's showed you still have this deficiency or you are improving.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and my question was, I appreciate that part. It's more like, so if something happens on a shift, an officer's not quite sure, an officer might need feedback, so the shift supervisor says, hey, here's areas you might want to look at. The shift supervisor then, like, how do you mentioned you find out about things, like, do you find out about things formally or informally? Is there a process where you consult with shift supervisors, or how do you keep an ear to the pulse of what's happening in the field? Does that make sense at all? Like you disseminate training down pretty much or outward, but how do you find out the efficacy of your stuff, or if basically troubleshooting? How does somebody troubleshoot and be like, well, this is what we covered, but in the field this is what happened?
Okay. Yeah. So me as I'm an FTO, and then we have an FTO sergeant, which is just essentially in charge of the whole program. We have meetings periodically, as a whole, and then sometimes I'll just sit in with my FTO sergeant. Those DORs that I write, he reads every single one and he signs off on every single one. So if he has specific questions on what I wrote, we'll get together and talk, and then I'll bring it down from the FTO sergeant to the trainee. If there's something that I want to get ahead of, he doesn't need to read, if I want to get it before, I'll just go straight to him and ask him. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah. Thanks.
And Matt, I think Matt, you were next, and then we'll go to Katie.
Hey, Daryl, also with the police department, these guys, they're not operating in a vacuum. Like, there's a supervisor on duty monitoring the radio, listening to what these guys are doing, showing up on the scene. Like, they're always involved, even if it's just a FTO like Tad or a new officer that's working. The sergeant on duty is hearing it on the radio and sometimes seeing it because they're out there observing it themselves. Such a small town. It's not like a department of 100 or 200. There's, at least at night, there's only like 3 or 4 guys on. So they're all involved in every call, right, Ted?
Yeah, most calls there's a supervisor there. Yeah. If it's be a helping hand, but usually the supervisor, I would say probably 50 to 75% of the calls, the supervisor there.
So what I wanted to bring up, Tad, was it's been over 30 years since I worked in Plasto as a cop, but there were 2 other mandatory arrest scenarios that I remember being trained in, and they were new in case law in New Hampshire at the time. So now they've been around for a long time, and I'm assuming they haven't changed. You mentioned restraining orders, but I was trained 30 years ago that any domestic violence or evidence of domestic violence was going to result in the arrest, and it was a mandatory arrest. Is that still the case?
So the only shall is violation. Should is domestic.
Okay.
So the word should still gives leeway for discretion.
Okay.
The way I understand it.
And Chief, does that change over time? Because 30 years ago it will, but that could have been a department policy.
It did change. Yeah, okay. The law was rewritten. It used to say shall, now it says should. Okay. However, our department policy is if there's any kind of assault or signs of an assault, if you can determine the primary aggressor, then obviously the preferred ending to that is to remove the aggressor from that situation.
And the second thing the second thing I wanted to bring up, and it is kind of just by rote and everybody's used to it by now, is the Kingston decision with minors with alcohol. Any instance, and this is going to be good for the town and the committee listening, under the Kingston decision back 30-something years ago, any kid or juvenile found with alcohol is going to result in a protective custody, which involves lots of manpower or woman power being on scene and calling adults, parents, and guardians to come and pick up the kids. And that's not a discretionary thing. You're compelled to do that by law, correct?
Correct. Nothing says we have to charge them, though.
Right.
All it means is we have to successfully separate the alcohol and the juvenile.
But in essence, they're in protective custody until an adult comes for them.
Correct.
And that, in essence, is, you're not charging,
right?
But they're not free to go either.
True. That is true.
Okay. Anything else that the committee or the public could learn from just talking about these 2 things? Anything else that anybody on the law enforcement side can think of that the town can learn from them?
Sure. To get back to the field training. So you have about 4 months at the academy and then 3 months in-house FTO. Now that can be extended as well. So we're not bound by a certain amount of weeks FTO or not. If the person is just simply needs a little bit more time, we'll give them more time. If we've given more time, and it's still not to the point where this person is solo status, that's when we have to have a real good discussion with that person. And perhaps this job isn't for them. I've seen in other agencies when I was there that people respond to a really bad car accident while they're training. and then the next day they don't show up for work, they quit. So again, it's not something the academy could have prepped them for, or really anybody could have. But at the same time, that person recognized that this job wasn't for them, instead of trying to stay and trying to make it work. So we'll have those conversations. We do have a 3-year contract here when we hire someone to the town. But at the same time, if that person's having difficulties, and truly, honestly, we can waive that contract for their benefit and for ours as well. We're not going to hold someone just for a contract or just to have a person fill that seat. So think about that. We have 2 open positions in patrol. Now, the next academy that they're probably going to go to is in August. So there's 4 months from August. And then it's going to be another 3 months after that on FTO. So by the time this person is solo status and is actually, taking calls and handling things, you're looking at almost a year. So that's why you can get behind really quick. That's just something to think about. We also have Officer Clouthier that's going to speak, and Dispatcher Joya as well. So I know I'm looking at the time, but it'd be great to get them involved.
I appreciate that, Chief. Can I have Katie, you want to ask your question, and then we'll turn it over to Officer Clouthier?
Yeah. So we talked about training dispatcher discretion and police officer discretion. I lived in New York for almost 20 years, starting right before 9/11, and it was the era of see something, say something. I wonder if there's anything you want to tell the community about community discretion. It seems like at each stage we could maybe learn about this. From your perspective, would you prefer people just call everything and you guys sort it out? Or would you prefer that people exercise a little more discretion, on our end as a community?
I would prefer the latter. They need to exercise a little bit more discretion. See something, say something. Obviously, it's come under a lot of scrutiny for legitimate reasons, because it wasn't targeting any certain behaviors. It was targeting the way people look, the way people are dressed, what they're wearing, right? It was right after 9/11. So there's no secret of the amount of scrutiny that came across. It's still valid, however, if you can support it with a behavior. And that's the most important thing. And people, their gut instinct is to call the police on everything these days. I will tell you, I've been to a home because the juvenile was not eating their vegetables. Okay? That is embarrassing. To be standing in the person's kitchen and to ask, what is the matter? What's going on? And then to be told that the juvenile is not eating their vegetables. Okay? So if people just take a step back, and is this really something the police need to be involved in or handle? So there is going to be that maybe I should call, maybe I shouldn't. I would say call. If you're unsure, call us. Not a problem. Never a problem to call us. But and common sense isn't 100%. Everyone has it, so we get that as well. But it's the malicious part of it, and the implicit bias, right? That's something that a lot of people are using a lot now. That term's been around forever, but people are becoming more aware of that implicit bias. So if you can become more aware of that, which kind of goes against the very notion of it being implicit, but with all the better training and the more thought about what you're about to say and do, that should help.
So if I may, there's 2 things. One, I know we're on time, but I would like us to continue the conversation if everyone's okay with that. And then 2, I had one question relative to the FTO program. What is the cost of that? And not that we're measuring things in terms of cost, and where I'm going with this is specifically, do you have the funding necessary to support the FTO? You do. Okay.
We do. And the cost is a contractual item. They get 1 hour of overtime per shift when they're training somebody.
All right. And that's, I just want to make sure that's the case, because again, I made comments and thoughts relative to how I feel about negotiations for the contracts that go up, I don't think that it should be any one person in town that has the sole responsibility of doing that. I think it should be done by the select board, that they should be negotiating the contract, not just one person. I just wanted to raise that question again. That's all. But let's continue on with the officer, Ben, if that's okay.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name's Ben. I'm relatively new. My hire date was, I believe, May 19th in 2019, so coming up on 2 years now. I was an electrician before I became a police officer. I'm 26 years old now, so I had a different career before I came over, but this was something that I've always wanted to do. It was on my mind, and I finally, came to the choice, like, this is definitely what I want to do. And I finally went for it. I'm happy that I did, honestly. But the transition was a little bit different because when you're jumping from career to career, there's obviously the different obstacles there. But I think that with this career, if I'm going to speak to somebody who might be on the fence about it, is really kind of do a gut check on it and see if this is something that you really want to do. Because it is different, and we do something, on the road. I'm currently on the midnight shift, so we do a lot of mental scripting, and we try and run ourselves through different scenarios, how different things can play out. And if you're on the fence, I think that you should do that because it's different actually going to a call. When I was in probably about within like 6 months off of FTO, I went to a pretty bad accident on 101. Where there were some juveniles, they were laying on the side of the road. They were actually ejected from their car. And for some people, I think that can be pretty hard, to look at. So I think that if you're on the fence, you really do need to consider it and think if this is something that you can do. And if there's resources out there now, luckily, where if you've gone through a hard call, because it could be your first day and it could be your last day, you don't know for your call, for the bad call, but there's luckily people out there that you can talk to. So if you think that you could have a hard time with something, just know that there's also resources out there for you to talk to. And we talked quite a bit about the FTO process, and I think I can speak confidently about ours. I think it was probably about my 5th week or so. So very new out of the academy. I had a call for a female that was walking by one of the schools, and they called her in as suspicious. And they said that she was wearing a hijab, but just her walking was suspicious to someone for some reason. And that's where, luckily, we have discretion, officer discretion, and we didn't go out to that because nobody could provide any more information besides the fact that she was merely walking by the school. And I think it's kind of disappointing to see that people would call something like that in, someone just walking by. Yeah, and something that, what really drew me to this career, I guess, is the fact that you can always help someone in day-to-day life. I'm sorry if the lighting's bad. I just realized the sun was in there. But you can always help someone in day-to-day life. You don't have to be a police officer to go out and help somebody. But I think that we are put in this unique situation where we can pretty much always help somebody in some way or another. And I was lucky enough to go to a crisis intervention training, which is a mental health training. And just being a person and a human and compassionate about what somebody's going through really, really helps somebody. And I found that that's the way that I like to approach my calls, is if you approach it with some empathy, you can get a little bit more understanding of what someone's going through. Because a lot of the calls that we go to, we're seeing somebody on a really bad day. So it's especially the mental health ones. They're having honestly just a really bad day. And if you can show some compassion to that, then it tends to help them.
Hi. Darius, go ahead. And I was going to ask you a quick question. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. You got it. I'll defer.
Well, it's really very timely that you made that you said what you had to say after the FTO went through all that he does. But maybe I missed the very beginning. Why was it that you switched from being an electrician to wanting to be an officer? Was it something you thought about years ago and then it just went the other way, or it was more recent that you?
Yeah. Something that was always introduced to me as a kid was a trade. My uncle actually was a police officer out of Hampton, but my dad always, talked about a trade and how a trade is a good career to get into and everything. So initially being young, that's what I thought about. Okay, this was it, but then there's also more to choosing your career, and I think choosing your career is something that you should truly be passionate about. And when I was an electrician, I was just, kind of going through it day to day, still doing my job. I liked it, but it wasn't exactly something I was passionate about. And with being a police officer, it was always kind of there for me. My father-in-law is also a police officer, so I would kind of talk to him about what he had going on. And it was always something that really interested me, and I think I was compelled towards.
And the reason, and full disclosure, was we talked about this sort of in our last meeting that, the chief is asking us, to look at, or not just the chief, but I think even Deputy Chief Monk talked about the differences in what kinds of people coming into the force. It's not always going to be somebody who's 18 or 20 or right out of college. There's a different type of person who may want to be involved in this and maybe start out a little bit older, but you've got a little more maturity as well. But that's really helpful to us to hear your story, because there's a lot of people out there that probably don't know that their next career could be this career, and how fulfilling it could be. So that's incumbent on us as members to hear your story and somewhat go forth and let others know about it. Anyone else? I didn't mean to take up the time here, because that's a really good. It's great the way we juxtaposed what the FTO had to say, and then you've just gone through it pretty much not that long ago. So was it everything he said and more?
Yeah. And a lot of the times with FTOs, we meet at the end of every shift. When I was going through FTO, I met at the end of every shift. They're with you on every call, obviously, and you're always with them. But there's a time that they try and set aside at the end of the shift to go over with you personally everything that happened. And if you felt like you could have approached it in a different way, how do you think that would have worked out in a different way? And they have, if you've done something wrong, there's criticism there, obviously. And also when we're on calls, if something's starting to not really go right, if they feel like you've done something wrong, then they will step in. And, it's kind of like that thing that Tad mentioned before. If you see that somebody's doing something wrong, you step in.
So I'm going to ask, I guess not the elephant in the room, is I ask the question: what would make you stay, and what would make you leave, and why?
I'm going to stay in general, because I truly feel like it's a passion for me. I think that's something that obviously attracts people to the career more. Is there's always that thing about money, where people always are gonna, they're gonna want to be paid more and compensated more. And I think that is an attraction to people. I think that education stipends and stuff like that are also an attraction to people. But what should originally draw someone to this career isn't money. It's the gut check thing. It's this is something that you really want to do. This is not, in my opinion, this is not a career to just get into because you think that you're going to be making a bunch of money. Right.
So I'll be a little more specific. What would make you want to stay in the Exeter PD versus leaving the Exeter PD? Is it, is there, or better yet, what would be is there anything else additional that can be done that would help retain, officers like you that would, less than 2 years, because it gets a 2, 3, 4 year time period, and then some of the officers leave, they go into other things. What are the things that would help retain here?
Okay.
Long term.
I think that we are actually pretty good with this already, but more training training is something that I think is very important. Coming from someone on midnight shift, we don't always get necessarily exposed to as much. So I think that more some training opportunities, but I think we're pretty up to par with that. A lot of people talk about a shift differential. Right now, we don't have a shift differential, and it is tough being on a midnight shift because you've gone from a normal sleep schedule of sleeping at night and being awake during the day to going in the complete opposite. Right. And then on your days off, you want to spend time with people and you have to change your sleep schedule again. So that is kind of tough for people. And I think that a shift differential might help break that up a little bit.
Okay, those are things that come up in negotiation with the select board, but we'll see. That's just my personal opinion. Anyway, that's just good to know. And it's like I said, I've worked in a paper mill over the summers, working 11 to 7, 3 to 11, and then you switch the whole schedule around and work it. And so I understand as far as the sleep cycle and trying to be and get into a normal schedule. But again, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your passion, because it's something that serves all of us well. So just from my heart, thank you. And the other thing, Emily, I'm always saying thank you to the officers, but I also want to say thank you to you. Not knowing the depth and breadth of what your involvement is in all those calls, but I also wanted to say thank you, and also to the dispatchers as well. But I wanted to say thank you to you. Because you're there as well sometimes we see people on their worst day, and you're there. And so thank you.
Oh, thank you. But the officers and the dispatchers, they really do most of this. So.
Oh yeah, I know. I agree.
I think Officer Searat has maybe a closing comment, we'll see, or something interesting.
Sure. I just wanted to add to Ben, everything he said is absolutely right. I think what is going to keep people is options and avenues. I get to ride the motorcycle and it's on nice days. We also have the crime scene unit team. We have avenues to join regional teams. The more you can give people, that's not just the day to day, because if you ask people, it's going to be, well, what do you like with the job? It's different every day. How do you make that more different? What are more avenues? So I think that's a good thing to think about, is what are more avenues that people can do besides show up and do the same thing every day.
I mean, but does it also help to see that there's a path to, seniority, or that there's the next step, or as I think the chief said a few meetings back, there's different avenues, even within Exeter. Someday you're a detective, or someday you get more into this or that. So they can see that there is an actual progression when they see, internal promotion, as well as folks coming in from the outside, that type of thing. I'm guessing that would help as well.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not about it. Money's huge, obviously, everywhere. But knowing that you can do more. And that's what brought me here to Exeter and police work, is that I can do more than just than my day-to-day stuff. So
I have a segue question that if Benjamin has anything else that you want to add, will be a segue question for the dispatchers. It has to do with role playing and scenarios of real world. I think you mentioned you bring in civilians that you trust. Has that ever been done where you get members of the diverse community that's in Exeter? There's a few of us. There's more, but to get them into role playing in different scenarios to help with the training in any way, shape, or form, and of course in a safe environment. But is there a way that we as citizens could become more involved, more engaged, to help recruit and retain and train our officers to be part of that, so that we understand what behaviors that we may need to change and do, or what we can do to be better when we're making those calls. So that's just a question. So you're muted.
Sorry, Chief, you wanted to respond to that?
Absolutely. We'd be looking for your participation, but something we wanted to do, but was affected by this pandemic the last year, was we also want to run you all through these scenarios that the officers are going through. So that'd be very eye-opening as well. So not only could you play as role players, but you can also be put in that situation and, We'll let you know what you can do as an officer, because obviously you're going to need to know a little backstory, but we'll let you know potential laws that you may be enforcing on this call, what you can do, and then we're going to put you into it, and we're going to see how it works out. And I think what you'll find, and this has been done before in other parts of the country where they've put newscasters through similar situations, and we'll see how it comes out. We'll have a great discussion on it. One of the evolving things with these simulators and these scenarios is not every scenario is going to end in a use of force. That's very important. And, thinking back a long time ago when I went to the academy, almost all of them did. Okay. There was some kind of use of force involved because they wanted to see how the officer could handle themselves. But, what's that training? That's causing the super warrior mindset, right? Where they now go on the street and they think, okay, just like they were trained, just like in the academy, every call's got to end in some kind of use of force. So it's very important to dial that way back and have simulation training where the officer can talk themselves out of it or can de-escalate without going to any kind of hands-on, any kind of lethal or less lethal force. So that's very important. That's what our leaders today in policing know has to be done. That's what our academy knows has to be done as well. So that's important to know that as well.
Is that something that can be filmed or content or used for training or as a way to, get exposure to attract other people that may not have thought about it? In other words, it can become a recruitment tool.
Yes, we'll be able to record our interactions. We actually have ordered a nice simulator, state-of-the-art simulator for our officers. And that's going to be what you folks are going to be going through should you volunteer to go through. But that's going to be recorded and everything else.
I just want to know, Officer Sierra, is your hand still up to speak? Is your hand raised because you want to speak?
No.
That's okay. Very good. I make sure I didn't miss anybody. But yeah, the chief's pretty emphatic about that one. I know we're getting late, so I really appreciate anyone have any last comments because this is I cannot thank you enough. Oh, Elliot, go ahead. Go ahead, Elliot.
I have a question on, of course, we talked about domestic violence, and back 50 some odd years ago when I was an officer, the one thing they always taught you, and I'm wondering if Chief Poole, if they send one person or two person on domestic violence, because whenever you went on a domestic violence call, the most important thing was you and your partner stayed back to back so you could see 180 degrees, because you go into a place where a husband's beating the hell out of his wife and you try and pull the husband off, and next thing you know, the wife is hitting the officer, leave my husband alone. So there were always two of us back to back, and I'm just wondering if it's still the same thing, or am I talking about antiques?
No, it's a very volatile situation, any kind of household incident like that. So we do send multiple officers to those calls.
Good.
Anybody else today? We're at correspondence. We did not receive any correspondence this week. But again, before I want to thank everybody. Go ahead, Darius.
So, Ashley, you're the last item as far as this discussion goes.
Sorry.
I'm looking at the time. It's 4:19. If we want to continue, we can continue. If not, I would make the motion to have that go through for next week, but that's up to the committee.
I was going to say, in Ashley's schedule, can Ashley come back next week, in 2 weeks, Chief?
I can be back in 2 weeks.
I know we have that agenda we've got pretty well figured out. You've been very patient with us. What does the committee feel? I'm not going to be unilateral here. How does everybody feel? I just don't want to shortchange anyone because we've had a lot of good conversation. I like to make sure everybody feels like they have enough time and they're not rushed. But what are the feelings of the committee? Matt?
If Ashley wants to make a presentation, efficiency of scale, she's here, we're here. But does anybody else have to go to a meeting or something that they need to get away from?
No, I mean, Emily may have to. Go ahead.
I have to go, and I know Molly Cowan already left.
Right. I think we still have Daryl.
It's hard during the workday just because.
Yeah, it's understandable.
I totally understand. Totally get it. Chief, what do you think? Mesh,
So for our next meeting on the 6th, we're actually going to have Dr. Sawyer speaking.
Right.
And she's going to speak for the whole duration. So perhaps we can bring Ashley back, several meetings after.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. And it's mainly because I think it's important, and it's been an hour and 20. People's brains start to lose focus on meetings. So I just want to give everybody the opportunity to be at their best. If you don't mind, Ashley, you've been very patient with us. All of you have been. Okay, why don't we'll move that to not the April next meeting, but the meeting after that. Okay, we'll put you up first thing. All right. Okay. All right. All right. I think if there is nothing else, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So just confirm, we had no correspondence, you said, correct?
Yes, I'm sorry, no correspondence.
Okay. Then I'll make the motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
Motion by Darius, second by Matt Carboni. All those in favor? Elliot.
Aye.
Matt.
Aye.
Katie.
Aye.
Emily.
Aye.
Alexis.
Aye.
Darius.
Aye.
Harry, how you out there? Harry.
Well, yeah, he's there.
And the chair says aye.
Okay.
Okay. Well, very well. Thank you all so much. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone.